นะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนะมัสสามิ Blessings, good evening. In Thailand, they have a saying that the true Dhamma friend is เพื่อนร่วมสุขร่วมทุกข์ friend who goes through happiness and suffering together with you. Maybe one of the English equivalents would be friend through thick and thin. The good times and the bad times. It's also a phrase we use when we're spreading metta, thoughts of loving kindness to all beings. One way of referring to other humans is friends in suffering and happiness, because they're shared experiences. There's not a single person born who only experiences pleasure or happiness, or somebody who only experiences pain and suffering. Life is a mixture, depending on our karma. Just like when you mix ingredients for food, say, sometimes you get it wrong, so sometimes there's more pain than pleasure, more suffering than happiness. It just depends on the recipe. In this sense, the recipe is your past actions. But it's a simple truth that when you're born as a human being into this world, because it's a physical, or we say sensual world, you experience pleasure and pain through your senses and having a human body. It's not all good, it's not all bad, it's not all pleasant, not all unpleasant. But the idea of the practice of Dhamma is to bring you to see that or know that and rise above it. So they say the Dhamma of the noble ones, those who have seen the Dhamma, practiced the path that the Buddha taught, is Lokuttara Dhamma, transcendental, or going beyond the world, or rising above the world. So when you practice mindfulness, it gives you that awareness, that knowing, so that if your mindfulness is present, you may experience some pain or some pleasure, but you don't get lost in it or lost in your reactions to it. You don't just attach to it, cling to it, but you know it as it is. This is why mindfulness can lead on to wisdom and understanding. So when you're mindful, you pay attention to things as it is, as they are. If you're truly mindful, there's no bias in the mind. You're not grasping at your experience, wanting the pleasure or hating the pain. So if you keep practicing mindfulness and cultivating the insight and the wise reflection, following the Buddhist path, then you can't help but notice that this is the truth, as the Buddha pointed out. It's a mixture of pleasure and pain living in this world. The physical body gives you some pleasure, but it gives you pain as well. And there's varying degrees of that. You sometimes what we call painful just means less pleasure than before. We may actually still not be in that much pain, but because it's less than before, it seems perhaps painful or unpleasant. So if you're used to experiencing lots of highs, extreme happiness, extreme pleasure, then when things go downhill a bit, reduce a bit, then it can seem painful, especially in extreme situations. When you've been on a high with adrenaline or other hormones and chemicals coming out in your brain or in your body, then when you get less of that high, it can almost seem difficult to be with, even though you might actually not be in any particular pain. Or particularly if you're addicted to some substance, a drug, an alcohol or something, then you get so used to it that you need ever-increasing amounts to sustain your feeling of pleasure or the high, that your body can't sustain it. So gradually you just need the addictive substance, even just to feel normal. And it's the same with coffee or nicotine. There's so many things. Or painkillers, different kinds of medication. If you get used to it, then after a while you need more to feel anything, and you can't go without it. Maybe if you're a coffee drinker, and then if you don't have your coffee, it's like, oh, something's missing. You feel sluggish or feel uncomfortable, and if it's for a day or two, you start getting headaches. The nature of the sensual realm is like that. The physical body and the material world is like that. You can't sustain pleasure all the time. And pain is the same. Pain goes up and down. So sometimes you have intense, painful experiences. Say if you have so you break your arm or something, there'll be times when it's really painful, and then times when the pain seems to fade, and then it'll come back again. It's not like painful all the time, or not at the same level or intensity all the time. Sometimes you put your attention on a painful feeling if you do have something like a broken arm or some injury. And by putting attention on that painful feeling, it seems to fade or disperse for a while. And then later when you're distracted, suddenly it comes back and gets you like a bite because you were distracted. But if you put attention on it with mindfulness, often the painful feeling becomes more bearable and seems to be less intense, less extreme. So this is the same for anyone in this world, even animals. Everyone experiences pleasure and pain. So we're all friends on that level. We have that thing in common. We all experience pleasure and pain. We tend to want more pleasure and want to avoid pain. So that simple truth transcends the more superficial descriptions and labels we put on human beings and human experience. So it's not like only one kind of people have pain and others don't. Not like sort of some kinds of people, they fall over and break their leg and feel pain, other kinds of people don't. Anyone who has any kind of injury or illness or just feeling tired or getting old will experience some discomfort from that. It's not only one gender or one age group or one nationality, and then all the other ways we refer to human beings and describe them. So it's not like only one kind of, people who have one kind of job feel pain and other people don't. Only bus drivers feel pain, but farmers don't. Only construction workers feel pain, but school teachers don't. It doesn't work like that, does it? Those are labels that may come with your particular career path or how you live. But it's more just being a human being. The karma, we say the karma of being a human being brings with it pleasure and pain from the past. How much pleasure and pain? Well, as I said, it depends on your karma. So some people have built up a lot of good causes and conditions. Maybe they have a lot of pleasure. We often say somebody must be really rich, powerful. They seem to be successful in life because they don't have to experience much pain. But it's the nature of a body, whether you're rich or poor, or powerful or not powerful, famous, infamous, anonymous. It's the nature of a body to feel pleasure and pain. You can't escape whoever you are in this world, because that's the nature of physical bodies and the sense organs we have. So you may have more or less pleasure and pain, but you still have it. That's different from Nibbana. Nibbana, once an enlightened person passes away, we say enters parinibbana, and that's it. No more pleasure and pain. Even an arahant, when they're still alive, will still experience pleasure and pain because they've got a living body, breathing, sensitive body. But when they die, that's gone, finished. And that's why we aim for Nibbana in this path. That's why we call it the highest happiness, because it's the happiness that's beyond pleasure and pain, suffering and happiness. And that is what Lokuttara Dhamma is. It's taking you out of this worldly experience towards the highest spiritual experience, the highest release or liberation from pleasure and pain and all that's associated with them. So it's the best, the highest, something that if you're following the Buddha, the wisdom of the Buddha and the compassion of the Buddha, then you're aiming for cultivating the Lokuttara Dhamma. It's not to look down on the worldly happiness, what we call Lokiya Dhamma, or Loka Dhamma. It's just putting it in its place or in perspective and saying, well, the Lokuttara Dhamma is the highest, it's the better. There's that sutta we often quote where the Buddha describes how people come to practice this path that leads to the Lokuttara Dhamma, the Upanisa Sutta, where he says somebody has some suffering and they realize they're suffering, which is an important step because often people are suffering, they don't realize it. Somebody realizes they're suffering usually because they hear Dhamma, hear some teaching, maybe they meet a wise teacher or somebody who's experienced in the practice, and they turn their attention around and realize, oh, I have suffering, more or less extreme or less extreme, but they notice or realize their own state of suffering and the unsatisfactory nature of life, that it can't bring you permanent sensual happiness, permanent satiation, permanent contentment because of the nature of the world. They realize that, and then they look for a way out. And Lokuttara Dhamma is the way out. They start looking and they hear the Dhamma from the Buddha or a teacher, and it gives rise to faith, saddha. The saddha isn't simply belief in a person or a teaching, but it's also the confidence in the pathway and the effectiveness of the pathway to bring one from a place of unsatisfactoriness out to the highest peace and happiness. But also a faith that oneself can do it. Me as a human being can do this, because I've met maybe or heard about other human beings who can do it, so I can do it. So to meet a living teacher who's gone a long way in the practice or is fully enlightened, maybe you never quite know, is one of the most useful causes for faith to arise, because then you meet someone who you think, oh, they've done it, so if they can do it, I can do it, because they come from the same flesh and bones, the same human experience of pleasure and pain, happiness and suffering, but they managed to go beyond it or transcend it. So the Buddha said, with faith arising, you get joy, pamoda. Makes you happy that knowing there is an escape, a way out. And you may look back and say, oh, before I was stuck in the unsatisfactory side of life with no thought or no way out, and no thought of a way out, and no realization that there is a way out. So kind of stuck, a bit like being in prison, and then realizing there is actually a way out, finding the escape tunnel, or maybe just getting parole, getting release. So naturally joy arises when you hear the Dhamma and you realize this Dhamma really is a way out of suffering, beyond suffering to something much more stable, reliable, dependable, peaceful, happy. Then it naturally gives rise to joy. So the Buddha said, you hear the Dhamma, faith arises and joy arises. And one of the effects of joy, as you become more joyful, you get enthusiasm, you get piti, rapture, enthusiasm for the practice. You're willing to practice, put the Buddha's teachings into practice. Once you have a sense of joy in the Dhamma and you realize that this Dhamma can lead to the end of suffering, to something better, then you get rapture. In rapture, sometimes we compare it to like the water bubbling up. If you find a spring in the forest or on the mountain, and you just got a natural spring, so all year round there's this water bubbling up. And you have a pool of water and there's a spring at the bottom, so you see the water bubbling up. It's a constant refreshing, has a refreshing effect on the mind. It makes you willing to put up with, the aches and pains of meditation, a mind that's all over the place, the difficulties of the practice. We already know the difficulties of life, but the difficulties of the practice, because it does take time, effort, can be challenging. But with the rise of joy and then rapture, you're willing to put forth effort. So also with rapture you get energy, effort, virya. As you put forth effort and you experience some rapture, it also is the forerunner of tranquility. tranquility of body and mind. You don't just feel enthusiasm, but you feel kind of at ease. Your body starts to settle down because you've seen the path, you've heard the Dhamma, you've seen there is a way out of Dhamma, so you feel a deep sense of inner tranquility or contentment. You may not have completed the path yet, and you may still have all kinds of problems and obstacles in your practice or in your life. But there's a certain inner tranquility that comes from this chain of skillful or wholesome dhammas arising in your experience. Piti, virya, pasadi. Tranquility is pasadi. Tranquility of body and mind. So it's a physical thing, mental thing together. Some of the best kinds of happiness are when your body and mind are in unison, calming down, relaxing, feeling good. And feeling good about the Dhamma, which is, it's not a material thing. It's teachings that point to the truth, that lead to understanding and pointing to the way out of the unsatisfactory side of life. So you feel good, you feel tranquil to know that that pathway exists even if you haven't fully cultivated it. Another way you might say is a light at the end of the tunnel, even though you haven't reached the end of the tunnel. It may seem a long, long way away, but there's a glimpse of the light, so then you feel more confidence, more steady, more determined to carry on because your body and mind are tranquil. And it helps you put up with the tiredness, the obstacles, the pain, the sacrifices, the giving up things, because of course if you're going to get beyond attachment to the sensual pleasure of the world, which is deluding, you sometimes have to give up. And we don't like that, but you have to see the benefits of it and then feel good about that, realize it will be good for you to do that. Because we're often pretty self-centered. That's what attachment is, isn't it? Self-centeredness, bias towards your idea of a self. And we don't like to give up anything. When we're full of greed and attachment, we don't even want to give an inch, don't want to budge. Whatever it is we're identifying with, our property, our land, our money, whatever it is that we love the most, don't want to give it away, don't want to even lend it to anyone. We're so possessive. Don't want to give away our happiness, so whatever we associate our happiness with, our particular likes and freedoms and desires, and the way we fulfill those desires, we don't want to share with anyone when it's coming up in its most extreme way. If you really like a certain food, you don't want to share it with anyone. Or you like a certain experience, you want it all for yourself. But when you have rapture and tranquility arise, then you're willing to put down the material happiness, the sensual happiness, at least temporarily, because you've got something else to sustain the mind. And that allows this quality of mindfulness and wisdom to merge and become clear seeing of the way things are. Because when your mind and body and mind become more still, it doesn't necessarily mean you're physically still all the time. You could be walking or moving, but your mind and body are still in the sense they're tranquil. Then you can see the way things are. You see feelings of pleasure are impermanent, and they're not really a self. Because they're impermanent, they don't last, they're temporary. So all this pleasure seeking we go for in life, it's only so good because it's temporary. It's not that there's no pleasure, but it's a limited pleasure because it's temporary. So if you have some inner tranquility and you're able to look back at your experience, physical and mental, you can see, oh, it's only so good, it's temporary. That high doesn't last forever, and it involves a lot of struggle to get, and it doesn't last. And the more highs you have, the less you get out of each high. So it's a very mature, refined kind of understanding, clearly seeing the way things are. And it's not aversion to the world, it's just acknowledging and knowing, oh, it's like that. Pleasure is only so good. It's pleasant, it's desirable, but it doesn't last. And what doesn't last isn't really a self, is it? It can't be because it doesn't last. It's not a soul or some kind of being that just is always there experiencing this pleasure. It's an experience that arises and passes away. So it's impermanent, it's unsatisfactory, and it's not a self. So clear knowledge and vision gives rise to detachment. You detach when you see it's only so good. It's temporary, it's not self, it's not mine to own, to have, to control. So your mind goes to detachment. It's just that much, is another way of saying. Ajahn Chah used to say, oh, it's just that much. It's not that there's nothing, but it's just not so great as you thought. So you don't take it so seriously, you don't invest so much mental energy in things that are temporary and you know are temporary. You know any kind of pleasurable experience, good thing that you can achieve in this world is good, but it's just that much. So don't get so excited over it because it's just that much. Don't get so disappointed when it passes, when it ends, or if you can't get it in the first place, because it's only just that much. It's a great deflator of experience. Oh, it's just that much. The very first day I was in Ajahn Chah's monastery in Wat Pah Pong, I was a layman and I was helping. They were doing a work project, and there was a drink bell, which was unusual. It was like 2 PM. There was a drink bell. I said, "What's that? The sound of that bell? Why is there a bell at this time? It was an unusual time." And the monk said, "Oh, there's an extra drink because we're working." I can't remember what we were doing. We were moving rocks or making concrete or something, just doing some useful job in the monastery. There's a lot of monks and the laymen staying in the monastery together working. So we were tired, we were hot, sweaty. So they brought out some ice and some soft drinks, which was nice. But I heard there was an extra drink, which was like gold in those days. You hardly got a drink. Most days there was no drink. So you got an extra drink. So I went, "Oh, an extra drink, wow." And the monk, who was a senior Thai monk, but he spoke a bit of English, he looked at me and he said, "Okay, don't get so excited. It's just that much. You drink it and it'll be gone." That's the truth of it, isn't it? The sensual world that we live in, you drink it and it's gone. You take it in and it's gone. Not to look down on it, but just not to get lost in it. It's just that much. So clear knowledge and vision of the way things are leads to detachment, which leads to dispassion. Your passions go quiet when you see things as just that much. You don't give so much of yourself, of your mind, to them when they're just that much. You can still have the drink, but it's just a drink. It's not like, oh, this is going to solve all my problems. You're not over the moon. It's just like, oh, it's just that much. The Thai phrase is "mai ao jing ao jang." it's not that real, because what's temporary isn't real, is it? It's like a fleeting thing, arises, passes away, like a shooting star on a clear night. It looks good for a second and it's gone. So you don't take it so seriously. It's not so real. It's not, even though they advertise it, say it's the real thing. It's not real, because it's just a fleeting, temporary, sensual experience. So it leads to dispassion, detachment, dispassion, disenchantment. It's the other word. Previously you were enchanted with all the things your senses can give you, and that feeds a lot of suffering, doesn't it? Because when you are enchanted with things and you don't get them, or they don't last, you get disappointed and annoyed and fed up and feel like your life is going nowhere because you didn't get what you wanted. But when you have clear knowledge of the way things are, and detachment and dispassion, and then you get disenchantment, and it liberates you. So you get liberation from attachment. Because you know it's not really you, it's not a self, something you can own, it's temporary. To attach is suffering, to not attach is not suffering. Freedom from suffering. So you get liberation. So this is the Buddha's teaching, transcendental dependent arising. Starts with dukkha, so it's turning dukkha, which is unsatisfactoriness, discontent, pain, suffering, sometimes minor, sometimes major, sometimes big, sometimes little, but it's turning it into something good. Part of the process of getting out of suffering is using suffering as your starting point. Then you turn to the Dhamma, you look for a way out, so you look for the Dhamma. We turn to the Dhamma when we're suffering, don't we? Because we want a way out. So everything else has failed. You tried everything else and you couldn't get beyond your suffering, so okay, I'll come back to the Dhamma. Some people are even reluctant. It's like, I'll just come back to the Dhamma then if everything else has failed. Try the meditation again, try listening to the Dhamma, try the vipassana. So you get a little bit of faith, a spark of faith, and then this whole succession of skillful qualities and insights arise. It's not like it's just once and then end of story. I mean, maybe for people in the myths and legends of the suttas, they hear one Dhamma talk and it all arises in one go. But most people, it's many times, isn't it? Many times you establish mindfulness, reflect, see the impermanent, unsatisfactory nature of experience, and then you let go. And then you get lost again. Because we still have doubt. We think, if I just go back and I'll get this pleasure again, then I'll be all right. It'll sort everything out, and then it doesn't last, so you're back to the Dhamma again, and people kind of flip and flop until you're a Aryapugala, till you've reached the Lokuttara Dhamma, then your mind flips and flops and fumbles around. It's another word Ajahn Kalyano uses, fumbling, groping in the dark. You think the Dhamma is good, and you practice a bit, and then you meet a few problems, so you go back to the worldly happiness. Go back to your pleasures, your pet likes and pleasures, and the things that you think will give meaning and happiness in life. And they'll give you a little taste of that, but then they fade again. And then you get fed up with this temporary nature of pleasure, so you go back to the Dhamma. So flipping and flopping from one to the other until one day all these qualities, the faith and the joy and the rapture and the energy and the tranquility and the detachment, dispassion and the disenchantment and the liberation are all established, and then your mind doesn't flip-flop back anymore. It becomes stable and fixed on the Dhamma. There's no more doubts about the five khandhas, this body, this mind. He knows these five khandhas are impermanent, not self. And the Dhamma is established, what we call the Dhamma eye. You're seeing things internally as Dhamma rather than flip-flopping, going back to the world. So even though it can be challenging practicing and we get tired and discouraged sometimes, if you can see that it is leading in the right direction and you, with patience and endurance, you keep coming back to the Dhamma, well, you just keep going if you don't give up. One day, then all these qualities will arise and you'll experience the transcendental arising that the Buddha talked about. So maybe I'll leave you with those reflections tonight.